Hey, good people. Grits or cream of wheat? Who the hell is racist? Does anyone ever ask could they touch your hair?
Black Like Me.
You're listening to Black Like Me with Dr. Alex G., a podcast that invites you to experience the world through the perspective of one black man, one conversation, one story, or even one rant at a time. Here's Dr. G.
Black Like Me.
Hey, good people. This is another great episode of Black Like Me with Dr. Alex G. If you've been a part of the Black Like Me podcast family, you know that I like to change things up from time to time. And so I'm going to do that today. And I have two interesting and very special guests. They're Eli and Jeremy. And these are the gentlemen who work behind the scenes on the podcast. And they're the ones that make sure that this show is crisp, that it is clear, that it has this audio excellence about it, so that not only are you learning, but it's an enjoyable listening experience. But sometimes we have these great conversations off the air, either prepping for a show or processing something. And so from time to time, I just like to bring these folks who are working with me on a weekly basis to the microphones to talk about what they're learning, what they're seeing, what they're observing, but really how they're growing or how they're experiencing change. And so Eli, Jeremy, welcome.
Thanks. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Like those are microphones in front of you.
Yeah,
so I know you know what those little knobs and dials are, but these are microphones as you talk into them. So we started working on this together a little over a year. We started probably the spring of 2018.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, almost a year and a half.
Yeah, we put out a lot of shows, and people are finding the podcast now, and they're going back. Like Eli and I just met someone recently who told us, they just started listening and went back
through the whole thing.
They said they went through the whole thing, so they must have been on vacation or something. They went on the whole thing. But unless looks are deceiving, both of you gentlemen are white. You're Euro-American gentlemen. Am I correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, from what I learned from Tyler's response, Euro-American.
Euro-American.
The response
right. We ain't white. We're not down with that. We're not down with that social construct shit.
That's what America tells us.
That's what America. That's right. That's right. But we're finding that a lot of our listeners are Euro-American, that they're trying to understand race and the gap and what they're missing and what they're overseeing. And so I just want to ask each of you, as you sit back helping me to produce this show, edit this show, market the show, are there things that you understand differently about racial tensions in Madison or in the world that maybe weren't as obvious to you before we started working together? Not that you were oblivious, because you're educated, you've been in different circles, but I guess I'm wondering if being up this close has changed things.
Yeah, I can go first. On a funny note, I will never look at like potato salad the same way again. I talk to all my white folks, and I'm like, black people think it's fairly weird that we eat these like salads that contain all this stuff that should be in the refrigerator. We just set it out. We eat it all day long. We eat it at 9. We eat it at 3 o'clock, and it's no big deal. Also, shower shoes. Didn't know shower shoes. Big deal.
Yes.
Like lots of white folk were like,
washcloth. Yeah. Wait, what you said? You said washcloth.
Yeah. I just use the soap. And I got my hippie soap with the like oatmeal in it. Keeps me exfoliated.
Yeah. Definitely. Do you share that soap?
Yeah, the whole family shares that soap, and we don't.
And don't use a wash rag.
Nope.
So we use soap wash touches rags. Everybody's booty.
Yeah, we use soap. We use wash rags to clean up messes in the on a more serious note, I think probably the most valuable thing that I've learned as a white person who's a would-be ally is
you're an ally now.
What am I? Okay. Well, I'm trying my best. Is I am okay with the fact that I'm probably, or no, I know that I'm a little bit racist. I know that there are times in my life when I will interact with someone and I'll be like, oh, wait, like that wasn't very good. I'm rationalizing it in my head. Yeah. It's just a little bit racist. And
reverse.
Yeah. And like, ooh, I'm like, we all know what I meant. Sorry. And that comes from something that you said a lot of times when you just say it's like water. Right, you're people that would
you're swimming in it.
Yeah, we're swimming in it. We grow up in it.
Right,
and like because you have to plan for it because you know that anything you're going to do in your life, publishing a book, getting a job, taking your kid to school, you have to figure out how to deal with that water and people how grew up in that water.
Right,
you can't ignore it. I can't speak for other white people, but for me being able to say, oh yeah, like my initial reaction to a number of situations is a little bit racist, allows me to not freak out about it.
Right.
And be like, oh my God. Because I think, like we see in national conversation and other places, the minute there's the accusation of racism, you know, like the conversation shuts down.
Right. Quickly.
Like nobody can learn, nobody can speak honestly. People who retreat to their camps. Nobody grows from that. And I think one of the most important larger political moments in terms of race in my lifetime was that speech that Barack Obama gave in Philadelphia before he got elected. When he says, you know, this amazingly bold statement, like, maybe we haven't yet totally figured out race in our country.
Right.
You know, and there was something about, for me, that's like, it was, for better or worse, it was a formulation of that statement that almost everybody could agree with. You know, and it wasn't like, there's races out there. It's kind of like, maybe, just maybe, we haven't totally figured it out yet. It was like the beginning of a conversation.
Because you have to say that nicely and gingerly to white
people.
Yeah.
And I mean, and I don't think it's perfect, but it was something like I could have a conversation with lots of white people about that speech.
That's interesting.
In a way that there's almost nothing else that was, you know, that had as much of a broad appeal. And so, yeah, like for me, being able to, this is just reiterating, but being able to say, oh, like, you know, like black man walks by, I think something in my head, oh, that's a little bit racist, Jeremy. You know, as if there's some sort of like little guy up there that, you know, that I grew up with and is like saying like, oh, you know, and I'm like, really? Like, I think that guy's fine. Why do I have that reaction? Or,
right. Where'd that come from?
Right. And if I'm allowed to think about that and have a little space from that, I don't have to identify with it. I don't have to say, like, you know, like, or even sometimes if I, you know, interact with someone and I'm like, like there's one time I was walking to my kids to school and a guy pulls up in a car on the side of the road who is black, and I ask him if he's from the neighborhood. Because where I live, it's right next to Kip Corp, and there's two entrances, and they often like do like hiring fairs, and a lot of times people drive to the wrong entrance, and they're like, where the heck to go? And sometimes even like the big 18-wheelers, if they haven't delivered there before, they don't know where to go. So I'm like, oh, like I'm just being like helpful, and I look at his face, he was like, what he heard was like, what you doing here? Right. And I was like, oh, totally screwed that up. like, and I was like, I know exactly how I saw, like, I appeared to him, and that was not what I was.
And you also didn't want to say, "Are you looking for a job?"
Right. I mean, yeah. Because like, and also like, I didn't need to say anything.
Yeah, you could have said good morning.
He doesn't need my help. Like, he will eventually get there.
He got grown and black all by himself. Jeremy.
And so I often find that sometimes, in terms of racism and sexism too, I will often do, when I screw something up, I'm often trying to help. Or like tell myself that I'm trying to help. But one of the things that I think differently about after being part of the show is like, I don't actually need to do anything.
Right.
We'll
ask you if we need your help. Don't call us. Eli, I was wondering, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. You know, you sit here as I'm doing my icebreakers week after week after week. What, if anything, have you noticed about what takes place during that segment of the show, particularly, you know, whether I know a guest well or not?
Yeah. Well, I think what we just recorded before this is a great example. You were talking with Dr. Tony Chambers, and the two of you had not met before today, I understand.
Right.
And during that icebreaker section, I could just see the clear connection between the two of you of growing up, of having those same shared cultural experiences. And, you know, he went as far as to say, hey, let me ask you some, because you could tell he was enjoying that experience so much of having somebody that he could connect to in that way. And it was so unusual. And I do like being able to kind of hear after the conversations too happen after we stop recording.
Sure.
And, you know, he also stated how much he appreciated having this space to have that kind of conversation.
Sure.
So I think, and this was, I think, your intention with those questions too, is to help people feel comfortable and at home in that situation. We also brought up, you know, sitting in a living room and kind of having a conversation. So I think I really see people open up in a way, and especially African Americans on the show, that I don't see them open up in a way maybe in other environments. It's really cool to kind of see that behind the scenes. And I get to see people's faces in those experiences too. So kind of leaning in,
And it shows the strength of those cultural ties. It's why many oppressed or marginalized ethnic groups or groups try to hold on to what they have in common, because those are usually things that make you laugh or think or say, oh yeah, those were the good days, because life can really be tough. But to say, oh, you ironed your jeans too, or to go even further than that, the assumption is something's wrong with you if you don't iron your jeans, or your grandmother called soap operas stories too. Like you can be from Florida or San Francisco, and we have that commonality. I'm still intrigued. I mean, each time I offer up the Black Icebreaker questions, I'm intrigued at how common those of us who are part of the African American diaspora, how much we have in common. That's just something that's powerful. Let me ask this to the two of you. How do you maintain your authentic cultural identity? And I mean that in the best way cultural identity in the best way possible, while being around discussions about disparity and the man and white folks, and well, you know what they mean when they say that. How do you avoid not being injured in the discussion, but still fully owning who you are? And I don't mean who you are in terms of the social construct of whiteness, but as men who are married, who are dads, who may be of European and German descent. How do you balance being true to who you are, but you're helping me proliferate my voice about becoming who I need to be, in spite of the pressures that come from folks who look like you? Did I just make that question even more convoluted by talking?
No.
This is what you guys talked to me about off the air, that I make my questions too.
We haven't done that in a long time.
But I guess what I'm really asking is it hard to come in here as men who are Euro-American and listen to black people rag on whiteness and talk about this? Is that difficult for you? Do you feel belittled in the process, or more empowered through enlightenment as you're working to facilitate the discussions that I have with people who look like me?
It's totally positive for me.
Is it really?
Yeah, I mean, and maybe it's naive of me, but like being here and listening to it is an educational process for me. I mean, it's like one of the things that I talk about with like people that I do sports with is like, even if you come out and you have a bad day at practice, you're still running laps around the guy who's sitting on the couch, right?
Very true.
So we're here and we're in it, and I just feel, I don't know, if I can sit here and listen to like honest, legitimate complaints about things white people do in Madison, still be friends afterwards. It feels like there's room for change, I often feel like there'll be times when the opportunity is really clear. I think there aren't a whole lot of opportunities for white folks to just make the right choice. I think our job is to make those opportunities. But the thing that I get time and time again from the discussions on the show is that white folks who believe that they are woke need to figure out what the heck is going on in Madison, right?
Right.
And talk about not the general idea of race relations, but the idea of
right.
your school and your neighborhood and your barbecue joint and your police officers and all that stuff. Because in the abstract, it's easy, but in the specific, that's where it matters for people that aren't you. Like it's like if in the abstract, it's about my identity. Like I'm a woke white person that is sensitive to black people and all kinds of minorities. But like, how do I treat you? How do I treat other people at my school? How do I treat other kids at that my kids' school when I go to volunteer? How do I, if I observe something that I think is inappropriate and somewhat and racist, what do I do about that?
Sure.
And those decisions are hard, but I feel like I just didn't know as much as I thought I knew. Right? That's right. Yeah.
Right.
I mean, I learn a lot more, even just learning like how important it is. You talk about like people putting change in your hand, right?
Right.
I never would have ever thought about that had you not mentioned it. And that starts me thinking like, what are like some other ways that like I can show, like very clearly show people respect when I interact with them and be really clear that like, I'm gonna look you in the eye. I'm gonna give you, I'm gonna treat you in a way that, that is the way you should be and want to be treated.
Right. Right.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. I think it's an educational experience for me. I gained so much listening to these conversations and sitting in. And I think in some sense we may be a little bit unusual, but I'm here because I've sort of had my time, or like, in a broader sense, white people have had their time. So I believe these conversations need to be heard, and we can be the ones that are listening and learning from that and understanding. And, on a more personal level, I think instead of my sort of whatever Euro-American white identity being offended in this, it sort of like brings out the qualities that sort of I forgot about in my own heritage in some ways.
That's interesting.
So I didn't think that I was gaining wisdom from like my father, let's say, who passed away recently. But I think in this process, it's reminded me some from your examples and hearing other men, especially, I think, talk about being fathers and what they learned from their fathers and grandfathers and that cultural heritage. I don't really have that experience beyond my father and my family, just personally, but to sort of reclaim that. And now that I'm a father, I think it's reminded me of how I want to instill that in my children.
That's great.
And so trying to be an example to them, and even in this race work, and trying to change things how can I live that out in a way that they can see it and not just like preach at them or something.
Sure.
But how can they actually see that lived out as well? So,
and I'm hoping you bring up a good point, Eli. I'm hoping that people will listen in and understand what we have in common also. Because the purpose of Black Like Me is not just to say we're an island to ourselves, but we want people to listen and say, oh, you got that from your grandfather? I want to instill that, or be inspired to bring some of those things into their own, to themselves as well, that African American culture that can be shared. But I think if folks who are white, of European descent, were really honest, there are probably things that you have in common. It might not be grits, but it might be unsweetened Kool-Aid. Or it might be or a special kind of cereal, or that you aren't allowed to eat cereal. Like, it's funny, I do this thing when people are visiting Fountain of Life, and I'll ask, what was your favorite cereal? Black people be like, Sugar Smags, Fruit Loops, Frosted Flakes. About a third of the time someone white will say, well, we weren't really allowed to eat cereal, and so
sugary cereal.
Yeah, sugary cereal. Like,
it was
what?
Only sugar-free Kool-Aid at my house.
Tiny
Tiny little packet, no sugar at all.
Oh, really?
I'm telling you, it's like, then what did you do on Saturday mornings when all the cartoons came up? You couldn't eat cereal. But I remember I went to
Watch
this
the
little
ads
church.
for cereal and want you parents to get it, but they
You
won't.
see, and if you have black friends, you can come over to their house, because we put like a bag of sugar per packet.
Yeah.
The other thing I want our listeners, particularly non-black listeners, to do is to think about race relations when it's not necessarily black on white. So, for example, I'm drawing a blank of the young lady's name who was kidnapped recently here in Wisconsin. Is it Jamie? Kloss, Jamie.
Yeah, you're close. Yeah,
Something like that.
Yeah.
Something like that. And she escaped. They found the guy that killed her parents. They have now moved him to another jail because to give him solitary confinement or something, because they want to protect his life. He feels very threatened. But I know 17-year-old boys who went to prison with grown men for years, and I don't mean jail. I mean prison, and they were not removed. And so I also want people that are listening to interact with news, current events, and just ask, if this person were black, would that mugshot look different? Or to look at, wow, they almost made us feel sorry for this person. Whereas if they're black, they're going to tell you, well, their parents are part of the Black Panther Party. Their parents were also involved in gang traffic, gang activity. And so I want people to look at the activity away from the ball, to use a sports analysis, so that they're not just looking at blacks and whites side by side, but just look at scenarios and just ask, would a young black boy be treated that same way? Would a young black girl be given that same benefit of the doubt? Hey, I hope you're enjoying this segment of Black Like Me. I want to take this moment to tell you about something new that we're adding to the Black Like Me experience. I've added a Patreon page. Yeah, that's right. Patreon.com/BlackLikeMe. It allows me to really connect with the listeners more. As I've been traveling the last few months, I am meeting so many strangers who are telling me how this show is having an impact not only on their personal perspectives and lives, but their professional lives. And that means a lot to me. So we've created a number of tiers, and I think you'll like this. Cream of wheat, grits with salt level, grits with sugar, grits with shrimp and cheese, a black icebreaker level. They give folks a variety of choices depending upon what you can afford. But what it allows me to do, depending on the level, where I will shout out your name on one of the shows. Another level allows us to have quarterly interactions on a private Facebook page. And there's another level that allows me to FaceTime with listeners individually to talk to you about what's going on in my world and in the studio and what's coming up. It's really exciting. We've been able to offer a great show to you for the past 2 years, and we want to maintain that level of professionalism while adding a few new things that I can't quite tell you yet. But please go to patreon.com/BlackLikeMe and help us take this show to another level.
One of the
Yes.
things I wanted to say too about like our own heritage part.
Yes.
I mean, one of the this may be sound a little weird, but I mean, one of the things that I feel like I've learned from interacting with you over this time is that like your blackness is specific and not general. In that, like,
Sure.
there's all kinds of discussion about black culture all over the news. Like, everyone's talking about black culture.
Like
and-
it's monolithic.
Oh yeah, and it's like, but there's not like a like I can search black culture and find 100 articles and NPR stories about it. If I search for like my family, which is from Sicily, like Sicilian American culture, like I'll come across a couple things, but there's not like a national dialogue about the effects of Sicilian culture on the United States. And the thing that I learned from that is like how to like so you tell a story about something like your mom, like lots of stuff that she did, and like blackness is part of that.
Sure.
It's not the other way around. It's not like your mother is the instance of American blackness. It's like she's your mother,
right?
And a special person you have a relationship with, and her black experience is part of that whole,
right?
So I can respond with something from my grandmother, which is like similar and relates to it more on a personal and specific level, as opposed to saying like, well, my grandmother as a representation of Sicilian American immigrants, yada yada yada.
Right.
And that just always feels like better to interact with you and your stories like as a person or a father or a community leader or someone who's trying something new with the podcast, and understanding that like the black experience is part of it but not its whole. And that's just been a change. I mean, there's like because you often talk about, and I've said many times, like you're a community leader who's black,
right?
Not a black community leader,
right?
And that's something that I have really,
because if I'm a black leader, that limits my constituents.
Well, yeah, and also, I mean, it's
and
like
my scope.
It's a limited, like the black community leader has like 5 characteristics,
right?
And I realized that's something that's created that was
black people
stamped onto you. It's not.
And black people did not create that terminology.
Yeah.
So you have to ask like even why someone did.
Yeah.
So both of you came to Madison, and you seem like you're astute men. So I would assume that you might have researched the community. Did you come here thinking that Madison was a progressive place?
Yeah, definitely.
Now you came from Iowa, right? And I had a guess, if not directly, but
Chicago too. Yeah.
But
grew up in Iowa.
And I had a guest who actually said, to my surprise, not really to my surprise, he said that Madison is less progressive than Iowa City. Mm-hmm. And I know Madisonians, when they hear that, the crap's gonna hit the fan. They're gonna be like, honey, clutch the pearl. That could not possibly be true.
Yeah.
I'm not saying you necessarily agree with that, but could you see, Eli, why he might think that Madison's less progressive than a place like Iowa City?
Yeah. And actually, after people hear more of his story, I think too, just the way he was personally treated probably had a big impact on that. Because we could say, we also talked about with him that there isn't a lot of diversity in Iowa City, I would say. So maybe it's not people's experience, but he would also know by the way he's treated by other people. And that's part of his story here in Madison, for sure, of how he was treated. And I also think of when I first moved here, and my son just started kindergarten right when we moved. And I was talking to another parent at the school. We were getting to know other parents. And I made a comment something about, yeah, it's really nice here. The school's diverse. And they just kind of looked at me like, really? I was like, yeah, I mean, from somewhere like Iowa, yes, this is more diverse.
Sure.
There are some black students here in the school.
Right.
Things like that. But that made me really, one of the first impressions of start to look at it was like, oh, maybe it's not what I thought it was here, Again, Iowa City is a college town, so people are maybe more educated and progressive in that way. But I think, as you've talked about, as more of the African-American community grew in Madison,
it changed things.
It changed how people were treated. So
exactly.
Iowa City may have not reached that point either.
Got you. No, that's a really good point.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank both of you for not only being on the show, for coming, to the microphones, because I respect your perspectives and you're working closely with me in this. But I also want to thank you for your commitment to helping to make a difference, because I believe that when people's eyes and minds are open, they can then be changed. And I think it's when people are closed that they don't do it. And you both know me well enough to know that I'll state what I think the problems are, but I want to invite people in to be part of the solution. And when you show up each week to help me do this, you may not be thinking that you're part of the solution, but you really are. People are listening. They're quoting things to me. They're talking about shows. They're meeting folks and saying, "Oh, you're Eli from the show. Oh, you're Tyler from the show. Oh, yeah, I like this analysis that you shared." So thank you for being a part of that. And I want to encourage the folks who are listening, help get this out to your friends, because this is really meant to be dangerously safe space. Just because it's safe doesn't mean that you aren't going to be challenged, and that's what makes it dangerous. But I just stand on the fact that when people's minds are opened and their hearts are open, they can begin to think differently and not necessarily change the world for everyone else, but they can start with making a change within themselves. And so think about what this means to you and for your community, because what we're pushing for is not just a stronger Black community, but really a stronger community of which we are all a part. So keep sharing, keep subscribing, keep letting people know about the podcast. Thank you so much for being a part of Black Like Me family. I want to thank Corey Saffold for creating the music for this podcast, my podcast manager, Tyler Nyland, engineer and editor, Eli Steenlage, my editor, Jeremy Holiday, and a special thank you to WORT Studios, where we record Black Like Me.
Ooh, Black Like Me.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast. You can find out more about Dr. Alex G's amazing work at www.alexg.com. Black Like Me is sponsored by the generosity of the Human Family Unity Foundation.